This conference is now being recorded.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the New York ASBO webinar, Managing the Budget. My name is Matthew Darius from New York ASBO. I will be moderating today's webinar. Your presenter for today's program is Mike Sanangelo. Operator assistance is available at any time during this conference by pressing 0. You may send chat questions at any time during the presentation using the chat window, indicated by a speech bubble icon located to the right of the presentation. I will now turn the call over to our speaker, Mike. Please begin.
All right. Thank you, Matthew, and good afternoon to everyone. We're here today to talk about a part 2 actually, of 4 parts webinar entitled Managing the Budget. Actually, as you can tell by the title and as you will see by the slides, managing the budget is an enormous topic, and it really encompasses the entire management of a school district. However, obviously we can't take the time to do all of that, so we're going to narrow it down to what hopefully this will be of interest to you as school business people, and also things that maybe if you're an experienced school business official, this may be somewhat of review for you. If you're a new school business official, then obviously you will want to pay particular attention to some of the concepts in managing the budget. Because the first part of the basics of the budget was not presented, I do want to go back and at least touch on some of those aspects because they do set the stage for the ensuing presentation on managing the budget. So today, what I would hope would be of interest to you and with your approval, go through and do some brief review of basic budgeting, which would include planning, the budget calendar, budget statement, the 3-part conversion, and a little bit on contingency budgets. And then we will begin to talk about more of the aspects of managing the budget, which will include encumbrances, fund balance management, and budget transfers. Certainly before any conversation about a budget, it's typically necessary and certainly required to have some sort of a policy that has been established by the Board of Education to set the stage for the administration to go forward and put together the necessary information to present a budget or to manage the budget. And as this slide shows, that the sound, effective budgeting process begins with the budget policy. It begins with the direction as set by the Board of Education so that all of the personnel in the district, all of those folks that are working on budget information and managing the budget have a clear idea as to what is required of them and also what is required of the process. And certainly there is a need, and some of these are listed here, and you'll have a copy of this, so I don't necessarily need to read it to you. You can refer to it later, but certainly adequate control of the process is required to be part of that education budget policy. There's information that is needed to fix the responsibility on who will be doing what, and certainly there are assurances of financial commitments that won't exceed specific appropriations, and we'll get into more detail throughout the presentation. I do want to point out that if there is, and I'm sure you recognize, but just as review, there is a major difference between establishing policy and establishing administrative regulation. And certainly what I have just described to you is the policy setting that the Board of Education needs to put together, in conjunction, of course, with the superintendent of schools. But then there needs to be beyond that. Once that policy has been put into place, has been written, verbalized, then there needs to be a regulation or administrative practice, procedure put in place that gives more specific details about the, in this case, budgeting process that we will be talking about. So always understand and know the distinction, and sometimes that is a difficult line to draw between policy and regulation, but again, the policy is to be set by the board and the regulations by the administrative staff. One of the things that the policy will do, of course, will talk about the preparation and presentation of the school budget, and we will talk more about that in the next section of this series of webinars. But it will also go through and establish some of the, when the annual budget needs to be prepared, and that there are certain laws and regulations that need to be followed in order to establish or develop that budget. And it will also charge the chief school officer with initiating and coordinating the whole process, and it will call in and talk about that the staff needs to participate to the extent that the chief school officer may need assistance. So again, the tone here, the board certainly sets the tone for the preparation, but the responsibility lies with the entire school community, or at least to those that have been invited to participate. And that could be a wide range of individuals, that could be many stakeholders, or it could be, depending on the school system, a smaller number of participants, certainly the school business official, but other members of the staff. If we're talking about a decentralized approach where a lot of the budget is put together on a building level, then certainly principals and teachers need to be involved in that process. And I would say at this point that probably if there is a trend, I think we see it in the New York State standards for certification for individuals becoming administrators. I think there is a trend of allowing or saying to each of us that are administrators to include as many people as possible in the school community. And that means, of course, with budgeting also. So I think that there is a trend, and I can certainly give some examples of that, but I think there is a trend of involving many stakeholders in the process. And that, again, I think is seen through some of the standards that have been set by the State Education Department as far as certification requirements. And I think it just makes good sense in today's economy and the way schools are functioning that we involve those individuals in the process. Some of them will be the naysayers, but my experience has shown that even including naysayers is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it can be a very positive experience, because if you can involve those folks that are least likely to favor your school budget, then by all means they may be, if you can convince them, they certainly can be one of the best cheerleaders for your school budget. So that whole issue of stakeholders, we will talk more about again in the next section on marketing or presenting the budget. But we're looking now at some of the content of a policy to set the framework for going forward. This is the suggested policy that you will find on the New York State Education Department website, and this is what has been listed as areas that need to be covered, and we have looked at some of these. Responsibility for preparation, long-range planning, the budget calendar, authorization, the format, the budget adoption, fund balance, administration, and budget transfers. And we will talk about many of these aspects today. Other aspects that are listed here will be brought up in later webinars, but we will focus on many of these suggested content areas for policy. Very often, school districts will, by necessity and reality, I think I can say, will try to create a budget based on something other than the educational plan. And again, I say that it is reality, it is sometimes necessary to base it on revenues. And that's what this chart, this slide is hoping to convey. It's not a new slide. There are many reference books and authors that have included this in their discussions. But you'll notice that on the left-hand side, the educational plan is the base for everything that should be put together on the budget. It is certainly the beginning. It gets out of whack, or it doesn't work well when it is based on revenues. And then we build the plan from that. It should be the other way. We should build the plan, and then we should look at the revenues and expenditures. Now, I understand, again, reality sometimes dictates that that can't be the case. But I would submit that even if you can't base your budget plan on the educational plan itself, that at least the process that you go through to come up with whatever that plan is, I think is well worth your time and effort to do that. And so that brings us to the first part of what we need to do, and that's planning. You certainly need to have some sort of a plan, a long-term perspective for a program and budgets. It is a practice that is recommended by the Government Finance Officers Association, and so there are many out there in schools that are using what is called strategic planning, and I think that is probably the type of planning that is most often used in school districts. Last year, Peter Weber, Assistant Superintendent for Business, and I did a series of webinars on organization and administration. We, at that point, talked in detail about strategic planning and other forms of planning, too. So if you are interested in strategic planning, you may want to get a hold of this organization administration webinar and take a look at that. But if I could just briefly go through and just highlight for you why it is important to have this plan. Sometimes the end product is certainly important, but the process is equally as important because you develop beliefs and missions of all the stakeholders. And these stakeholders come from, they can be teachers, administrators, they may be outside groups, they may be your taxpayer revolt group. There could be all sorts of people involved in this strategic planning process, but it is necessary, I believe, to at least start with this before you begin a process. And again, there are other plans besides strategic planning that you could incorporate. But you need to look at the analysis, the strengths and weaknesses of your internal analysis, some of the things that are going on within your school district. You need to look at the external analysis also. And the textbooks would call that SWOT, SWOT, where you look at strengths and weaknesses and threats and opportunities for your school district in particular. And then I think it is important that you have objectives and action plans with measurable results. That usually can be the basis, the action plan can sometimes be the basis for you to establish your accounting chart of accounts based on whatever the action plan is. So you may, and usually with the new computerized financial management software, that allows you the opportunity to assign certain program numbers so that you can keep track of your action plans by program rather than just by line item. And it, again, would be an opportunity for you to show that as one of your budget line items also, and talk to your stakeholders about that. And certainly with any strategic plan, a key element is that it takes evaluation and update. And so as we move along to the budgeting, before we get into the managing the budget, again, I just want to make sure that some of the basics have been covered. This is just a summary of the budgeting calendar. This is certainly readily available out on the New York State Education Department website. There is certainly that's printed and reprinted in many places. So all of us probably have seen this many times. But you'll notice here that there is a legal essence to the budgeting calendar that has to be followed, and certain things have to occur: the budget notice, the hearing, the budget statement or the popular budget, and then the property tax report card. All of that needs to occur according to these dates, and certainly if you haven't dealt with this in the past, you need to find a copy of this, again, out on the New York State Education Department website. I've summarized it here for your use also, so that you can put together your budget calendar. But it is a basic that is absolutely required. The other basic that is needed is the budget statement. And that is a document which follows, again, it's a requirement. It has to be prepared. It has to be put forward if someone were to ask. And what it does is it requires you to take your line item budget and put it into the three-part format of administrative, program, or capital. And I will show you what those are in just a minute. But the emphasis here is that we're talking about managing the budget, and the three-part format is basically a budget presentation requirement. It is not in a format that is readily available for use easily as far as managing the budget. So for presentation purposes, you need to put the line item budget that you would manage the budget with, the school with, in a format for presentation. And then it also needs to include the property tax report card, the school academic report cards, and fiscal accountability. All of those are available out on the website, New York State Education Department website. The salary disclosure, where you disclose the amounts of salary and benefits for any individual who has the word superintendent in their title. That means assistant superintendents, associate superintendents, deputy superintendents, and for this past year it was any individual who earned over $118,000. The new number, to my knowledge, has not been established for the new budget season that we'll be in shortly, or that we're in now. But you need to have all of that available. The salary disclosure and property tax report card, remember, gets uploaded to the New York State Education Department. And then the new requirement in the laws of 2008 were to have attached to this budget statement any tax-exempt properties that you have in your district. Again, this information is thought to give full disclosure to the public. So now this slide, again, hopefully you've seen this before, but it shows you in summary form how to take your line item budget and convert it into the three-part format. It really is a pretty straightforward type of exercise, The only difference sometimes is in legal services. If the legal service is for an administrative purpose, like negotiating, then obviously it would be considered administrative. If the legal service is something that may be for a program like a special education hearing, then that would be classified as program. But by and large, most of the conversion is pretty straightforward. Most school districts, once it's been accomplished, again, they don't have to necessarily keep worrying or working with it. It is pretty well in place for the ensuing school years. The administrative component, again, this is from the regulations. It shows that it's the Board of Ed, the superintendent, the business office, all of those items that you might consider administrative activities. And again, there is some judgment involved, but that's the way that a lot of the interpretation, a lot of what we do is judgment and interpretation. The program component, basically anything to do with teaching and transportation. And then the capital component goes into some detail as to what is incorporated there, but by and large, it is capital items regarding transportation, such as purchase of buses, debt service, lease expenditures, all of your operations and maintenance type of expenditures, construction, etc. This one is quite lengthy, goes into a second slide. But again, those are there for your benefit. They're certainly readily available out there on the website also. This is just some of the basic information that I wanted to review with you. Another requirement that you have is to put together a school district budget notice. That notice is in the format that you see here, and many school districts include this notice with their budget brochure that may get sent to the residents of your school district. Again, it's self-explanatory, I believe, as far as you can take a look at it if you're not familiar with it, but you basically put in information, again, that is thought to be of interest and use to the public in determining whether or not they can want to vote for your budget or not. And in this case, recall that you also need to include the column for contingency, which we'll talk a little bit more about in just a few minutes. So this is a requirement. Whether you choose to put it with your budget brochure or, as some school districts, you send it separately, that is your prerogative. But certainly it is a required form and one that you need to be familiar with and make sure that you send out on a timely basis. Now, just looking at some of the expenses or expenditures that school districts are involved with, I put these down because I think they are somewhat more elusive than some of the other items that we talked about. Elusive in the sense that there are gray areas and there are not always straightforward information that you need, that you will have to be able to estimate or project what your budget expenditures are, and that has a bearing on managing your school budget, because some of these items that you will have to deal with in putting together the budget obviously will be very, again, vague or elusive type of estimates that may change quickly when you get to the point of actually managing your school district budget. But for instance, salaries can be very readily available and easy to do if you have your contracts established with your bargaining units. But if you don't, then you have a judgment call to make. Are you going to use a percentage that maybe was the last percentage that was put on the bargaining table? Maybe if you're not that far along, maybe it's a number that you use that is the average of what the other school districts in the area have been settling at, or maybe it's some other number that you tried to come up with. But sometimes you don't have a good salary number, is the point I'm trying to make. It's not always fixed, and so you will have to estimate at times what your salaries will be. Certainly has a major impact when you come to manage the budget, because in managing the salary items, you may have budget transfers that you will have to make because of some of these items that are not in place when budget is developed. The fringe benefits typically are very straightforward once you get the salaries in line. It's typically quite a straightforward process, except if you're self-funded. If you're self-funded and in the area of health insurance or workman's compensation or unemployment, it's sometimes very difficult to estimate what the amount of the fringe benefit or health insurance will be. How can you certainly know what your claim experience will be in the ensuing school year? And so, once again, for the most part, fringe benefits are quite straightforward, but as far as managing your budget, the need for transfers in the future, you may find that in this area of health insurance or self-funded insurance, that you are experiencing some need to make transfers because, again, the information is not that readily available or easily available to come up with a budget time. The same is true with enrollments. Now, I would suggest, and probably most of you do, already project your enrollments for the future before you begin your budget process. Typically, the methodology that is talked about for enrollment projection is the cohort survival technique or methodology of projecting enrollments, cohort survival. What that is merely a statistical look at the enrollments that you've had in the past and trying to project what those enrollments will be. As with any statistical information, you certainly need to take that in consideration, but that can't be the end of it. You need to look at your enrollments and you need to try to make some sort of judgment as to what it will actually turn out to be. It may be more or less than what the cohort survival has indicated. And so it will have implications for what happens when you're trying to manage the budget, because at that point, if your enrollments are off, and according to the cohort survival method, then you may have to make adjustments. And if you have estimated too low, then obviously that could have major impact also on managing your school budget. And so you need to take particular time and attention to trying to get the enrollments to where they should be. The supplies are fairly straightforward as far as estimates. The only thing to remember on supplies are typically based on enrollments. So if your enrollments are off, your supply costs may be off. That may require then some sort of budget transfer for the supply item. Debt is fairly straightforward. Again, most of your debt, if it's in place, you have an amortization schedule. It's not too difficult to pick off those numbers off that and to put that into your budget. But what if you are involved in a building project and you have yet to issue debt? Therefore, you have to make some estimates as to what that amount may be. You may have to, and obviously, make some estimates as to what you may be able to borrow at, what interest rate. And that is not always an easy process, especially in today's economy that we're faced with. So you may find that in the area of managing your budget, debt may be an issue or an area that you need to take particular concern about. Utilities. There is really no way to accurately estimate what utilities will be in the future, as we all know. We've been through this process. The best you can do is look at what you've done in the past. You can try to make some estimates as to what the future cost may be. Certainly if you're involved in a consortium, you may have some costs that are locked in, and so that may help you in being somewhat more accurate, but it's very difficult to ever try to come up with or predict exactly what the usage will be. Who knows what the weather will be and how much utilities will cost. And so this is another area that may, again, when you're managing your school budget, may require you to come up with some transfers that need to be made. Special education is another area. We all know the cost of special education. Most of us in the school business area have seen where certainly the cost of individual programs has gone up, spiraled in the last few years, and if you have additional students with special needs moving into your school district, it could certainly require that you may have to adjust your budget to accommodate a new student that may come in with special needs. And the last one I put in there, which is obviously not an expenditure, but in today's environment needs to be at least remembered, and that is state aid reductions, as we have just seen after this past summer, after the governor vetoed the state aid package, and also after the Congress didn't come through with some aid that the governor had put into his budget. Now school districts have to be concerned about reducing the amount in their aid category to accommodate what the governor has said will not be forthcoming to the school districts. So I'm sure there could be other ones, and maybe as you think about this webinar, you can come up with some other areas of particular concern and attention. Certainly in the time that we have, these are the ones that I thought we should take a particular look at, but there certainly can be other ones that you might think of, and would be interesting to see what you come up with. Now, I don't want to talk for any great length on contingency budgets, because in the past, most school districts have passed their budgets. The passage rate in New York State is very good, but you do need, I think, to at least be aware of some of the ideas and concepts of contingency budgets, and so I've included here a brief slide that would try to show you some of the areas to pay particular attention to. And really, once you establish that cap, and I will show you in the next slide the actual formula that's used, but once that cap is established, the items that at this point, and this has changed over the last decade, used to be a lot more items had to come out of a contingency budget, but at this point it's really three major areas, and that is certain salaries. If you have an individual on staff that is not covered by a bargaining agreement or an individual contract, then you're going to have difficulties retaining and paying that individual. And I think most school districts at this point have recognized that problem or issue and made sure that their staff have the necessary contract or written agreement, employment agreement in place so that they can be paid. The other aspect is that if you go to a contingency budget, you cannot purchase equipment except for two areas where you can. If you have additional enrollment that you did not anticipate, then you can buy equipment. So if you had 100 more students show up that you didn't anticipate and you didn't budget, and your policy is to give each student a laptop to use, certainly then you could add that could be part of your contingency budget. The other area is health and safety, and most things that school districts do these days certainly boils down to health and safety issues. But if there is equipment that you need because of health and safety, you certainly can purchase that. Where this becomes an issue is usually in the area of maintenance and operations. Maybe you need a new lawnmower to mow the lawn. In contingency, you would not be able to do that. Okay? It would force you possibly to invest money into an older or dilapidated type of piece of equipment. But nonetheless, that's the contingency rules and regulations. You would not be able to purchase that new piece of operations and maintenance equipment. And the last thing is the pupil supplies, to be distinguished from the teacher supplies. And most of the time, again, the New York State Education Department has a list of items that are considered to be pupil supplies versus teacher supplies. But pupil supplies are usually those that are retained by the student. So if you give a student a pencil to use for the school year and it gets used up, that is a pupil supply. I suppose if you were to tell the pupil to give you back the stub that's left, maybe it would not be. But at any rate, consumable items that students would use, like writing pads or notebooks, things of that nature, might be considered to be a pupil supply. If you were to go to contingency, the best thing to do, because most school districts don't usually separate their supply items in that fashion, would be to try to come up with some amount of money that would represent what pupil supplies might be, and at least make some sort of effort to take that out of your contingency budget. Remember, the dollar caps 120% of the consumer price index or 4%, whichever is less. We did see this past school year that the CPI, the consumer price index, was a negative amount, which could have meant that contingency budgets might have been decreased from the current budget, but again, the State Education Department stepped in and capped the amount at 0, so we did not have to at least go backwards on the contingency amount. And that was the first time in probably 50 years that the state, that the country has experienced a time of deflation rather than inflation, and probably unique. The numbers come from the Department of Labor, and if you look at those numbers, they seem to be trending to small but nonetheless positive amounts for the consumer price index. So chances are, at least the way it looks at this point, we probably won't be in a negative situation for the next budget development season for next year. And then the other important part of contingency is the administrative cap. And that is the lesser of the prior year's budget or the last defeated budget. You'll notice that the calculation is administrative divided by the administrative plus program. Capital is not considered in that equation. It's only the administrative and program. That's why it's always of particular interest and benefit to your school district, as we talked about the three-part conversion, to try to get any expense item into the program items, because then you make that denominator bigger, and maybe you would have a better chance of saving some of your administrative expenditures if you get to this point. So that is just some brief, again, ideas that even if you don't get to contingency, you obviously know, I believe, that that number needs to be put on every school district's budget notice, so you need to understand the calculation of it. I've included on the next slide the formula that you use. This is readily available at the New York State Education Department also, but it is what is needed, used to actually come up with your contingency amount. I would ask you to please pay particular interest to the area that talks about the budget expenditures attributable to projected increase in school enrollments. There is particular guidance from the State Education Department about the calculation of that amount, and so I would caution you before you put a number in there to check the New York State Education Department website to make sure that you are calculating that number in the fashion that is recommended there. The next slide, we're going to start talking now more about the actual management of the budget. You will note that GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board, has obviously put out a lot of pronouncements, but one of them talks about the government accounting and financial reporting standards. It defines the appropriated budget as expenditure authority, and it goes on to set some principles and guidance about budgeting. And some of these may seem to be obvious, but they are the basis for which other organizations build the parameters and the regulation for school budgeting. I thought it was interesting to put these down for your use to look at. It says here the annual budget must be adopted by the governmental unit. Again, GASB is concerned about governments, all governments, not just school districts. And so this is a much broader aspect than just school. The accounting system should provide the basis for appropriate budgetary control. We'll see, and you will read, that the budget needs to be integrated into the school finances or the financial accounting system. And so that is a principle upon which the reason we do those sort of things. And then there should be common terminology, obviously. I think with school budgets, we all have very common terminology that we have learned and used over the past, and I think it serves the public well to be able to see and understand those different terms and know that they are consistent. So, as we look again, moving toward the budget management, and we look at the budget is an essential ingredient in the financial planning, control, and evaluation. Every governmental unit in New York State is either required to or should prepare an annual budget. And before we can talk about managing the budget, we need to talk about that we have to have a budget, and that how that budget is put together very often talks about or leads us to how we're going to manage. And again, as we talked about at the very onset, managing the school budget is really talking about managing the school district, because it should reflect the programs and ideas of all the stakeholders, and so it is inseparable from managing the school district. There is a very good pamphlet that really is put out by the Government Finance Officers Association, but it looks at all of the different principles and best practices of budgeting. It's put out by the group National Advisory Council on State and Local Budgeting. It's if you go to the Government Finance Officers Association website, it can be downloaded. It is a pamphlet that I think sometimes when you have a question or someone says, well, gee, why are we doing this in budgeting? It may give you some guidance and help in responding to that. And some of the ideas and things that we're talking about today come from that booklet. The first one is monitoring the financial performance versus the budget. It is considered to be, according to the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, it is considered to be one of the best practices, or a good practice, if you will, of financial management of a government entity, which school districts are a part. And as you can see here, regular monitoring of the performance provides an early warning of potential problems and gives decision makers time to consider action. And we're going to look at some of those early warning signs specifically for school districts as we go forward here. It talks about the output. What is the output, or what should we be looking at? And this best practice talks about a budget to actual and a budget to projected actual comparison of not only expenditures but revenues and cash flow and fund balance. We should look at that not only on a current year basis but long term. And one of the next parts in this series talks about long-term financial planning. And then at the end of each one of the best practices, it talks about some notes, some ideas, some other concepts, and this talks about consistency and timeliness, which is very important in the managing of your school budget. And that, I think, tells us that we should be looking at managing and looking at the degree to which there are variances, if any, from our school budget on a regular, ongoing basis. We certainly, as we'll see, are required to supply the Board of Education with certain reports which show this, but I think as good stewards of the funds of the school district, this needs to be something that we are constantly looking at and monitoring. Now, again, going back to, as I mentioned at the beginning, the administration of the budget, and this is a suggested content for policy that is put out by the New York State Education Department, again, readily available out there on their website, and it goes through that the chief school officer is responsible to the board for keeping the adopted budget in balance. Now, obviously, the chief school officer, i.e. the superintendent, needs some assistance in doing that. Very often, we as school business officials and others are called upon to assist in that endeavor, but that is a part of the policy that should be in there. It certainly is the responsibility of the superintendent, but as it goes on to explain, all people that the superintendent may require to assist in that endeavor should be involved, have to be involved. And then the adopted budget should also be in the format of the Uniform System of Accounts, which is adopted by the State Education Department, which allows school districts to have uniformity in the way that financial information is presented. And also then, by doing our budget in the format of the Uniform System of Accounts, lends itself to being able to compare that to the actual amounts of expenditures more readily. So this is just saying that your budget should be in the format of the Uniform System of Accounts. And again, I don't need to go through and read all of this to you. It's there on your slides for you to look at. Again, it is a content area that is out there and suggested to be a part of the budgeting policy. Now, why is managing the budget so important? And I think if we look at it from the point of view of what the State Education Department has put out, and that is fiscal fitness. That is F-I-S-C-A-L, fitness. You can see why it's important, because we have to make sure that we have enough cash on hand to pay our current bills. These are aspects on this slide of what a fiscally sound school district will have. You're able to meet your long-term debts. You provide the service level to your students according to your strategic plan or to the plan that is been adopted in your school district. You have a long-range fiscal plan that we'll talk about in subsequent series of this webinar. You're able to maintain your buildings in good condition, and all of your federal and state claim forms, all of your reports are filed in a timely manner. and you've engaged an auditing firm to look at your finances throughout. Once a year they look at it, but it is for the transactions that have occurred throughout the year. And then the last one there is the frequent interaction occurs between the board and the administration, keeping the board completely informed as to what the fiscal status of the school district is. But that is why it is important that we manage the school district, because we are obligated to maintain the fiscal fitness of the school district. And so in order to do that, we need to look at the finances and make sure that everything is in order. Now, what is a healthy financial condition? Now, again, these are some aspects right off the New York State Education Department website. Hopefully, I've found these and synthesized some of this information in one place, save you some time and effort for the future. But a healthy financial condition is providing stability and continuity of operations. Very important. If you have ever faced a deficit in your school district or know of a school district that has, it can be extremely disruptive. And so you don't want to get into that situation. You want to monitor and look at your school district and make sure that you are in a healthy situation. You have the resources available to help students achieve. And I think we all need to recall this, especially as school business officials, that our reason for being here, the reason that we're managing our budget, and the whole aspect of what we do is to help students achieve, to participate in that endeavor, that larger, grander endeavor to help students achieve. And that our part is to make sure that the finances are in good order, the resources are available to accomplish that. And also by having the healthy financial condition, we will also have greater credibility with taxpayers. Now that's what the state ed has said, that there'll be credibility with taxpayers, but I put in here something a little beyond that that I think is probably better, and that is stakeholders. I think not only taxpayers, but even those that are not taxpayers. The healthy financial condition will gain us credibility, will gain the school district credibility with all stakeholders, whether it be teachers, principals, administrators, tax groups, whatever the case may be. So it's important that we maintain this healthy condition. It also is important for recruiting and retaining staff. Certainly, if something goes wrong in the finances, it may result in there have been articles written where clerical error has occurred and people had to be laid off just because of the clerical error that occurred. And it could easily occur if we face variances in our budgeting. And so we need to make sure that we have the finances available to help retain and also recruit new staff members. We certainly need the finances available to pay our bills. It also provides access to financial markets. If you have been through or if you go through a Moody's upgrade where if you're selling bonds, you'll know that Moody's is very interested in what your financial management of your district is and the procedures that you go through. In fact, part of your credit rating will be based on how well you do that. And so it is very important for that purpose. And then the last one that I have listed here, and we'll talk a little bit more about, time's running short, is to gauge fiscal stress. And that is the situation that you want to try to avoid. There are a lot of things you can do to monitor your budget and to make sure that you have controls in place. I've listed a few there. Certainly the analysis of actual expenditures and projected expenditures to your budget is paramount. You must do that. You must make it a regular challenge to look at that information and make sure that everything is on track. I think it's important, too, if you assign cost-centered responsibility. That simply means you get principals and people, maybe department heads, budgetary responsibility for a number of accounts, and they are responsible to make sure that they stay within those spending limits. And certainly, I think if you assign certain individuals, then you can go back to those individuals if there are issues that arise, and it helps to hold others accountable for some of that cost center responsibility. Encumbrances are very important and necessary and required to set aside funds for future purchases. We'll talk more about that. Requisitions and purchase orders and purchasing policy is very, very important. That gives us the guidance that we need to make sure that we are following all of the legal procedures necessary to purchase goods and services for the school district. Conference approval forms. And certainly before someone commits dollars to a conference, there should be some form, and purchase orders usually don't give a lot of help with that. It's easier to use a conference approval form that's been signed by the superintendent and possibly others to show that that has been approved. There's also the new computer software has been very helpful in making sure that limits are set on spending, because most software now you can limit the amount of dollars that are in an account. Actually, a purchase order requisition won't even be allowed to be entered if there is not adequate appropriation in that account. So it's been very helpful. Timesheets for payroll, which show the amount of time worked that have been signed off by the supervisor, again, provide a level of control that is absolutely necessary. In your business office, to make sure that we have good internal control and separation of duties so that the possibility of fraud has been minimized, obviously as a way to control and monitor what is going on and maintain good budget control. Treasurer receipts are required. Any receipts that come in, the treasurer should be, any cash receipts that are received by the treasurer, a written receipt should be given, and it not only helps to identify the cash and its source or any sort of revenue, even if it's not in a cash form, but it also gives the individual giving you the revenues some assurance that that has been put in the correct place. We've talked about the uniform system of accounts, which integrates the budgeting system with the actual financial system. Your claims auditor, very important to have someone in the claims audit position that will take the time, has the attention to detail to find certain possible errors that have occurred in putting together the warrant. Really, that individual, the way the new regulations are set up, has an awesome responsibility in making sure that nothing is paid that goes beyond what is called for in the regulation or the law or in the school district's policy manual. So it's a very important position. Cash flow and investments. Certainly, you need to do a regular cash flow to look at what is available to you. You don't want to get into a deficit situation because that would be an extremely difficult situation to get out of. Why do we do expenditure reviews? Why do we compare the budget to actual? Well, there are some obvious reasons, I suppose, but we want to make sure that the appropriations, the planned expenditures, are sufficient. Certainly when we put the budget together and it may be months later when obviously the budget is actually spent, so we want to make sure there's sufficient appropriation to do whatever we need to do. And that is certainly a reason to do an expenditure review. We want to make sure that the plan that we have come up with and the actual expenditures are on line with what we planned. And certainly we can tell that by looking at an expenditure review. If we see that we are spending beyond what is called for in the budget, then that would alert us to look deeper and maybe to find, well, there's some expenditures we really didn't plan on that might be going through. The effectiveness of the results. How effective are we if we have done a good job at budgeting, then we can gauge what we're actually spending and the effectiveness, one aspect of effectiveness, financial effectiveness, on the amount that's being spent. And the last one is certainly, as the first, to do an expenditure review as a first indication of financial stress. And we need to monitor all of this at several levels, not only the business administrator or the treasurer, but the cost center administrator, that person responsible for those budget codes. Certainly the purchasing agent and the superintendent and the board need to regularly look at the appropriation reports and make sure that everything is on track. We talked a little bit about encumbrances. They're basically, I have a definition there from the Government Finance Officers Association, but the first line I think tells it all: appropriations that are spoken for. It just simply means that there are funds set aside, but there's an extra level of control that are put into school districts that are required for any government entity. You won't see them in the private sector, but it is necessary to have everything encumbered. And then we talk about, and the State Education Department throughout the years has talked about what they term as mass encumbering. And that simply means to encumber anything and everything that you can possibly think of. Even if you don't know the exact amount, come up with your best estimate. What that will do is set aside the funds in the budget so that they can't be used for something else. And so there are some here that lend themselves nicely to doing that. You certainly can encumber the salaries and debt. Utilities, you may not know how much you'll be spending, but based on prior years, maybe you'll even just want to encumber the entire amount of the appropriation that's in that account. Just to set it aside so it's not available for anything else. Same with BOCES expenditures and fringe benefits. And really, to make this worthwhile, you should do this no later than September 30th. Mass encumber everything. You can go back and adjust as new information becomes available, but it certainly is worth, I believe, the effort to go in and attempt to set aside those funds so they can't be used for any other purpose. And the same is true on the revenue side. You need to be very vigilant about looking, especially in this environment that we're operating in now, your state aid. And I'm sure many of us are finding that the state aid that we anticipated at budget time is not the amount that we are going to receive this year. And so we need to constantly evaluate that. We need to be alert and look at where we are and try to make estimates and projections about where the district will end up at the end of the year. That is also true in tax revenues. You could have situations with tax revenues where there are property tax adjustments, where there, through the grievance procedure or court cases, where the revenue that you anticipated receiving may not come to be. And so you need to constantly look at that. And the same is true in other revenues, where it may be interest expense. And with interest rates the way they are fluctuating, it is important that you look at all the other revenues that you might have, because some of those may not be keeping pace with what you thought would occur when you did put the budget together a few months ago. So, and then the last thing, obviously, is fund balance, which we're going to talk more about. But fund balance is probably one of the most important aspects of school district and gets a lot of attention. Before we get there, we're talking about transfers. And the transfer is certainly a procedure, commissioner's regulation, a methodology within certain limits where the budget can be adjusted for certain unanticipated expenditures. You can't possibly think of everything at budget time. It just would be near impossible. And so by the time you start operating and using your budget, you need to have a method in place whereby you can adjust the budget. Now note here that from the budgeting handbook, that it says here the board is responsible for that. Very often, though, the board delegates that to the chief school officer, to the superintendent. And it's very important to know that the school business official or the treasurer can certainly make recommendations, but that sign-off needs to be with the superintendent according to the regulations. So you have to make sure that the superintendent is a part of that adjusting or transferring of the budget. Very important aspect that sometimes gets overlooked. And then the fund balance, it says here in the handbook that the business official is charged with that responsibility of accurately trying to estimate the fund balance. That is a very important aspect of the work that school business officials do because, as you know, that amount of money or a portion of that can be or very often is used by boards, superintendents, by the school district to adjust the tax levy. And so you need to try to project what that's going to be as accurately as possible, starting probably at the latest January in a budget development season. You need to make sure that you're coming up with those sorts of estimates and adjusting them as it gets closer to the budget vote date. Very important aspect. Why is fund balance important? As I mentioned, because it certainly has the tax levy. There's certainly implications for the tax levy. There are certainly adequate fund balance will help to mitigate some of the future risk that there may be in variations with expenditures in state aid, as we're seeing in today's environment. It can be used, fund balance can be used to help keep the tax rate somewhat stable so we don't see spikes that oftentimes the tax-paying public is not amenable to seeing. It certainly affects your credit rating. As you increase your fund balance, your credit rating is impacted by that. Very often Moody's, as a credit rating organization, looks favorably on adequate fund balances, and so you need to be concerned about that. You may have seen at this point that, again, as I mentioned earlier, the governor anticipated receiving some federal monies, federal medical assistance percentages it's called, which didn't materialize in Congress, and now we're experiencing volatility in the revenue section, and we may have to use more fund balance. Some districts may have to make up for that difference. There's certainly a debate with fund balance, and throughout the years I've seen this. Some administrators, board members feel that you shouldn't have a lot of fund balance because that really is taxpayer money. That should be given back to taxpayers. Others say it is fiscally prudent to have a fund balance. And so there is this continuum of those that are for a lot of fund balance and those that are not. And I'm sure your district, all districts fall someplace within that continuum. And then the last one, as we talked about in strategic planning, is the environmental scan. What that simply means is that there could be things in the environment that you have no control over that are impacting your district, and you, by managing your fund balance adequately, will be able to help mitigate some of those issues. This is just a chart, the next one, slide that shows the aspects of fund balance, reserved and unreserved. Remember, the unreserved fund balance, the unappropriated part of that, is limited to 4% of next year's budget. That's according to real property tax law. So again, you need to keep in mind to start trying to project that no later than January, and it'll can help prevent swings in the tax rate and prevent deficits, which, if you get into that situation, would require special legislation. I have listed next a series of reserve accounts that are for school districts. I put down some of the aspects. I would encourage you to look through that. Again, all of this is readily available on the New York State Education Department website, but I want to give you some time to ask any questions that you might have. I think these are self-explanatory: workman's compensation, unemployment, the repair reserve, capital reserve, insurance, property loss and liability, debt service, tax reduction, tax certiorari, retirement contribution, which, let me caution you, is only for the employees' retirement system, not the teachers' retirement system, and the employee benefit accrued liability reserve. All of these are available to school districts, and only available. If the reserve is not specifically authorized by law, and I've indicated in there what law you would find those in, then you can't have the reserve. There are other reserves that other government entities can have, but school districts are limited to these. And the key with managing reserves is to try to find those reserves, and most of them fall into this category, that are available for board action. That is, it doesn't require to have the public vote on it. That would give your board the most flexibility in dealing with moving money from one reserve to the other. Again, if there are some limitations, there's certain limitations to the amount that can be put into certain reserves, and you need to be aware of that. I have indicated that on these slides, so hopefully you can review that, and if you have questions, you can let us know at a future time. We'll try to get to those. But again, I think we've talked about the strategies to promote fiscal stability. Some of these items, like developing the 5-year financial plan, we will talk at length about in the next segment. The budget administration and managing fund balance we've talked about. You certainly want to look to maximize your revenues. There are webinars that are available from the New York State ASBO that specifically talk about maximizing revenues, specifically about state aid that were produced last year. You may want to get a hold of that. And again, the idea with managing is to look at some of the things that you can do to create a good financial school district. And this is from a book, Public School District Budgeting, which is put out by a gentleman by the name of Hartman. It's published by the Association of School Business Officials International. And if you go out on their website, you can purchase Mr. Hartman's book. It has a lot of good information. It is specific to school districts, and you may find it helpful. He lists some aspects of how to, if you're in a situation where you've managed the district, you're finding, though, that certain things have to occur, you may need to take a look at some of these options that he lists as far as adjusting your budgets. And as a rule of thumb, we try to adjust the budget as far away from student programs as possible. In recent years, that's been more and more difficult to do. But obviously, we don't want to touch programs if we can at all possibly prevent it. And then I've listed also some cost-saving measures that you may want to look at for your school district. And they may be helpful to you. You may have already incorporated some of them, but I would encourage you to look at that. And we've talked somewhat about transfers, and I think the rule of thumb to remember on transfers, if you have to provide any transfers, is that you basically cannot move money into the equipment code. Is about the last thing. There are other parameters also that you will find on the web here on some of the things I put together. But basically, you can't move money into an equipment code because that has to be approved by the voters, as we talked about when we talked a little bit about contingency, except if it's for health and safety or if in the case of student enrollment. So there are some rules here about transfers can be made between contingent items or from non-contingent to contingent, and you can go through and look at those definitions. If you're on a contingency budget, let me caution you that there are special regulations about budget transfers. There's one regulation that would be for school districts who have passed their school budgets, but if you're on a contingency, you also have to stay within the administrative cap that we talked about. And so I would caution you about that. The authority to move or to transfer money is based on a commissioner's regulation, and your school district would have a policy. Sometimes it is between functional areas, sometimes there's a dollar limit, but your school policy would be tell you exactly what that would be. Non-contingent expenses include things as new equipment. If you're a small city school, you cannot subsidize your school lunch fund. We talked about pupil supplies, non-essential maintenance. Certain consultant services are considered non-contingent, and as we also talked about, certain non-instructional salaries. And lastly, if a non-contingent item is public use of property without a fee. You can let individuals use the property if you charge a fee. And then certainly the ordinary contingent expenses are broken down into these items, which are, first of all, they are determined by the board, but there is guidance through this 1967 opinion of the council for teacher salaries, legal expenses, those specifically authorized by statute, and other items to preserve the health and safety of students. I've included here a copy of the budget transfer form that is recommended by the state. This is sometimes an issue when you have supplemental appropriations. If the budget is in place and you receive additional funding in the form of state aid, please note that no board may incur a liability in excess of the amount appropriated by a district meeting unless such board is specifically authorized by law to do so. So there has to be some specific law that says you can do it if you should receive additional funding from state aid. And this just goes on to give you a little more detail about what the supplemental appropriations may look like. There is a regulation, Commissioner's Decision 15541, about the supplemental appropriations. So this would be something that should, in the future, school districts get additional aid. Along with your attorney, you would need to review this. But there was a caution from the Commissioner about not using additional aid for certain purposes. There are certain reports that have to be given to a Board of Education. I've listed them here: the budget status report, treasurer's reports, trial balances, the annual independent audit, a listing of the budget transfers, and the warrants or those items that are being paid for. All of these reports need to get to your board. I would submit to you that these go beyond what are required, but rather than just do what's adequate, I think maybe if you include some of these other reports that tie in, you will, again, be giving credibility to some of the district's financial information. And then the reporting as far as the appropriation status report, these are items that need to be included on the revenue status report. You need to at least have the original amounts and then the estimate of what you think will happen, what you'll receive in the future. The same is true for appropriations. The appropriation report has to show at least these items. Can certainly show more if you choose, and so you need to keep that in mind also. The references that I've used for the presentation are listed here. Certainly, I know it's late, but that's the information that I have for you today. And again, we have a couple other parts of this series coming up in the next couple of weeks. I would encourage you, if you have questions, to submit them in writing. Maybe even if time runs out here, you can submit them to the New York State ASBO. We can try to get those answered for you. At this point, that ends the presentation, and I will give it back to Matthew. Matthew?
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. We do have one question for you.
Okay.
From G. Ketchup. It's a question on the budget statement. Do we need to print out and attach all the academic report cards, district-wide as well as individual schools, to the budget statement? Instead of printing the documents, can we post them on the district's website?
I believe that the budget notice must be mailed to the taxpayers. I believe, I am not aware that putting it on the website is adequate as far as meeting the regulation. I believe the regulation was specific as far as mailing the budget notice. Now, as I mentioned, it can be put on the back of the brochure, or it can be mailed separately, however the district chooses to do it. I can remember when it first came out, the issues about each one of those ways of taking care of it, but I believe, and we can double check that, but my understanding is it must be mailed.
Okay, another question just came up here. Does the school budget notice need to be in a separate mailing, or can it be included in the budget newsletter?
Yeah, as I just mentioned, it can be included in the budget newsletter. The budget notice does not have to be a separate mailing. Now, again, going back to when the requirement first came out, there was controversy and issues about that it had to be a separate mailing. That is no longer the case. That controversy has been settled, and it is sufficient to include it in the budget brochure, or if the district chooses, it can mail it separately.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We're going to give you just another minute. Anyone who has any questions, please go ahead and type it in the chat, and we will get to you. Otherwise, if you have no more questions, you can hang up and log off, and that'll conclude the webinar. Okay, Mike, we have a question from Kristen Barrett. To confirm the supplemental appropriations slide, can a school district increase budget appropriations if they receive a gift for a specific purpose?
If they receive a gift for a specific purpose, yes, then they can increase appropriations for that specific purpose, if it's a gift of funds. Yes, that is okay. What I was getting at here is, if there is cases where, I think it was a couple of years ago, schools didn't budget all the state aid that they received. They got some additional state aid, and they were trying to appropriate that and then increase certain expenditures, which the commissioner cautioned them they shouldn't do. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means there's certain expenditures that could not be spent if you did receive the aid. But in the case of a gift, then yes, the appropriation can be increased, and the revenue side would be increased, and you can spend those gifts.
Okay, thank you very much. Last call for questions. We're going to give another 15, 20 seconds here. Okay, we got another question here from Amy Whitmore. Is there any limit to the amount that can be contributed to the retirement reserve?
The amount that can be contributed to the retirement reserve is the last 3 months of the school year. Again, it can only be used for the employee retirement system. And the idea for that is to be able to set aside, as you know, the employee's retirement system ends in March. And so there still is April, May, and June of the school year where you may want to reserve money to pay for the retirement cost in the next school year. So you are limited to the amount of for those 3 months, April, May, and June. Again, I would suggest that you go out to the website and look under the budgeting handbook, and you will see all of that listed there. All of it is readily available out there, but that is my understanding of that reserve.
Okay, thank you very much. Looks like about it. Everyone, thank you for attending today's webinar. The webinar we had to reschedule we're currently finalizing a date on it, so we will be emailing you all very shortly as to the status of that one. Thank you for attending, and hope you all have a good day.
The moderator has ended the conference. Goodbye. Thank you for calling.